It's 35 years since the Eighth Amendment was voted into the Constitution to prevent politicians ever legalising abortion in Ireland. There remains now more than 2 weeks before the people will be asked to keep that provision in the Constitution or else to repeal and replace the Eighth to allow the Oireachtas legislate for abortion. As we enter the final weeks of the referendum campaign, Adele McAllister has been looking back at where it all began.
The wording of the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution was settled in 1983, the beginning of a tumultuous journey on the right to life of the unborn.
I happen to think that pro-life means something.
In the midst of the political turmoil of 1981, both Charles Haughey and Gareth Fitzgerald promised a referendum on a constitutional ban on abortion in response to the newly formed pro-life amendment campaign known as PLAC. Eventually the referendum falls to the Fine Gael and Labour coalition.
Mr Gareth Fitzgerald, before he was elected, told us that he would, and I honestly don't feel he will go back on his word.
But the wording of the proposed Eighth Amendment, which gave equal right to life to the mother and the unborn, prompts a warning from then Attorney General Peter Sutherland that it's too ambiguous.
It is possible that the court, in interpreting the provision, would say that a doctor who is treating a mother, an expectant mother, for a condition which required treatment, which might or would remove the fetus and terminate the life of the unborn, might feel that he could not prefer the mother to the child.
It was a bit of a bombshell when Peter Sutherland pointed out in 1983 what the problems were, what the ambiguities were, and I certainly agreed with him, and I felt we shouldn't put anything as ambiguous as that into the Constitution.
The referendum goes ahead with the original wording and is carried 2-1 in favour after what PLAC campaigners describe as a carefully considered debate.
This reflects well on the Irish people. The good thing about this debate is that it has been conducted for quite a considerable time. For well over 2 years, this issue of the referendum has been debated, and specifically for the last 6 months or so, the issue has been debated in considerable detail by the Irish people through all the media and through the normal means of communication. And I think it's fair to say that the judgment that was passed today, the significant majority in favour of the human rights measure that was passed today, is a judgment that was not taken hastily.
In 1992, the debate is dramatically overshadowed by the X case.
This case concerns a 14-and-a-half-year-old schoolgirl who was raped by the father of a school friend last December. The girl only told her parents about the incident 3 weeks ago. They travelled to England on February the 6th. The following morning, following an application by the Attorney General, Mr Justice Costello granted a temporary injunction restraining the girl from leaving Ireland to have the abortion. When the family found out, they returned to Ireland.
The Supreme Court eventually allows the girl to travel. It leads to another referendum where voters favour the right to travel, the right to information, but reject suicides as a grounds for abortion.
I suspect some people who would favour legalised abortion will make some noise, but legally speaking, the position is, as was always stated by the pro-life supporters, the amendment does not have the implication that people attributed to it.
In March 2002, another referendum aimed at setting aside the threat of suicide as grounds for abortion is narrowly defeated with 50.4 against and 49.6 in favour.
The decision presents some challenges for us as legislators, which I personally hope we can work to address.
However, it will be a decade before legislation is passed. In the meantime, Ireland finds itself before the European Court of Human Rights in 2010, when 3 women seek clarification on access to an abortion where their life is deemed at risk.
One of the women, known only as C, had a rare form of cancer and feared she'd relapse as a result of the pregnancy.
the debate resurfaces with the death of Savita Halappanavar, and in 2013 the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act is passed, finally defining the circumstances where abortion can be legally performed in Ireland. Last year, the Oireachtas Committee examining the Eighth Amendment followed the Citizens' Assembly's recommendation to liberalise the grounds for access to a termination. The government followed through with a referendum on repealing or retaining the Eighth Amendment, indicating they would legislate to allow terminations up to 12 weeks in the event of a vote for repeal. One of the country's longest campaigners on the issue says what is now at stake is the removal of protection for the unborn.
Any commentator, and I think we will be confident when we say this, any commentator, regardless of their views on the issue, who's versed in political science, will say that in the short to medium term we will finish up with abortion on demand. That's not in any sense an unlikely proposition.
Despite the deeply held opposing views, many agreed this campaign has been conducted in a better atmosphere.
The atmosphere, I think, today is not anything like as charged as it was in 1983. It was really, really difficult, downright unpleasant, very, very confrontational in 1983.
After more than 3 decades of debate on the issue, voters will ultimately decide the fate of the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution on May 25th.
May 25th, the people will decide. But in the meantime, Minister, in the final weeks of the campaign, will you address, because arguing for the government side, it's your proposals, will you address that point being made by William Binchy? It's a point the polls would appear to show that many undecided voters are also extremely worried about, that allowing the Oireachtas to legislate for abortion, and your intention is to allow for abortion up to 12 weeks on request, that is going to lead to UK-style abortion on demand?
I don't accept it. We're not the UK, first of all, we're Ireland. We have a very different history, very different culture, very different approach to many of these issues. Secondly, I mean, that debate is ancillary to this debate, to my point of view, because I think that debate is about, do we trust democracy or do we believe there's a better system there? But as long as you have a democratic parliament, the people are represented in that parliament, what happens out into the future...
So trust politicians is your answer?
Well, I think it's ancillary to the debate, is what I'm saying. I mean, either democracy works or democracy doesn't, and if we want to discard democracy, well then let's have that debate, but that's a separate debate to this. I mean, we have to deal with the issue of an amendment being decided in the Constitution that prohibits abortion in almost every circumstance unless the mother is suicidal. Do we accept that that is correct? Do we accept that that's proper? Do we accept that that's fair and compassionate? This is the question we have to ask, and I think introducing another question to it, do we trust politicians, isn't doing the issue that we have to address.
Well, it's a question that voters are putting to themselves, I presume. Thomas Byrne, that point the Minister is making. Under the Protection of Life and Pregnancy Act, under the Eighth Amendment, we do have abortion in Ireland. We have 25 abortions taking place legally in Ireland in 2016. We have, as the Fine Gael point out, 9 a day travelling, up to 3 a day importing pills, and this from every county in the country. So why won't you trust women, their doctors and politicians, as the Minister argues?
I don't think it's a case of not trusting women or not trusting their doctors. The simple fact is, at the moment, is that there is protection for unborn life in the Constitution. It's obviously balanced with the right of the mother, but that protection of unborn life has been completely removed in this particular referendum, and I think that's what a lot of people have difficulty with, that there's nothing really being left to replace it with except the will of the Oireachtas at the time. And let's be honest, the government proposal to have abortion on request up to 12 weeks and abortion in other circumstances up to 24 weeks. That's the issue I think that people have difficulty with, that we're going from one particular point of view right over to the other end of the spectrum. I think that is where the battle lines are really drawn, and that is why a lot of people are voting no, actually. It's not that people are unsympathetic to difficult situations, but that they feel that this really goes way too far.
And that is a point. One politician on the yes side, Louise O'Reilly, I was talking to during the week, said that, many people out there, the message about 1 in 5 is hitting home. They do not want to see abortions taking place at that kind of rate in this country, while they have every compassion for people in difficult situations.
Well, Aine, it's important to say this is not England. Our doctors are not English doctors. Our politicians are not English politicians. I think what's central to this is the need for us to start to trust women. I don't think it is acceptable, tenable or indeed credible that we would have a provision in our constitution which facilitates a woman to travel to another jurisdiction to avail of healthcare that is not available here in this state. I think, you know, and I spoke to people, I'm doing a huge amount of canvassing with Together for Yes. I just make I just want to make a very brief point. I spoke to a gentleman, he's in his 70s, he on a door in Fingal, and he said to me, look, he said, love, when we put it in 1983, we thought we were doing right by women, and I see now that that was wrong. And he said, I am glad that I will live long enough to be able to make right that decision that I made in 1983. And he will be voting yes because he trusts women and because he recognises the fact that unless we vote yes in this referendum, we can't regulate the importation of abortion pills. And we are saying that it is okay for Irish women to travel to avail of healthcare in another jurisdiction that they cannot avail of here in this state. And that is not tenable. And it's not true to say that we're travelling at lightning speed on this. It's 35 years. It's hardly travelling at lightning speed now. It's actually travelling very, very slowly. And I think the next step is a yes vote.
Michael Collins, that point that we are actually exporting our women and exporting the problems to another jurisdiction.
That point can be made. Unfortunately, I feel that the way women have been treated in this country is appalling. And a lot of women, if the proper services were here in this country, they wouldn't have had to travel. And we talk about the UK, and they says we're not the UK. We are not the UK, but we are heading that direction. And don't be anyone here in this country be fooled by anyone. No, sorry, I didn't interrupt. And democracy in this country, you mentioned there, we've seen in previous referendums where democracy in this country lied on you. I spoke to people who've been women who've been raped. And have had a beautiful child after such a monstrosity after happening to them. I've spoken to women who've had abortions. I've sat and spoke to them and the difficulties that they have found in this country after having an abortion. No care, no facilities. I've also spoke to Dr. John Monaghan, an obstetrician who's performed over 5,000 births in this country. Never once did the 8th Amendment.
I know, but you also know about the advice from the Institute of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. And there was much, and there is a difference of opinion here, and the voters watching are going to have to decide. But I want to ask you, and you say you've spoken to a lot of women. The yes side asks for women to be trusted, doctors to be trusted. What do you say to a woman who has been raped? And while some women are terribly brave and do continue with the pregnancy and mind their children, what do you say to a woman who says, I have been raped and I want to have an abortion? This is an infringement of my human rights and I don't want this baby.
As I said to you, I've met women and I've never failed to or refused to meet anybody in any situation.
But what answer do you give to that?
You know, with the women that I've spoken to that were raped and went ahead with and had a beautiful child out of such a monstrosity event happening in their life, they're women that need to talk to people that are in a situation where there's a rape. We're very, very insensitive. We have something in this country we feel we should get rid of all these problems as they arise in front of us, instead of maybe dealing and caring for the woman. There's no care here for women in this country. A very, very poor care.
But what do you say?
I would advise them. I would advise them to talk to people who've been in that situation. But they must have the baby. And do everything in their power to save the baby's life, because the baby is not wrong here. The baby's done nothing wrong here.
This is the issue, Louise O'Reilly, that maybe many people on the yes side don't like to deal with, that it is actually competing human rights. And the 8th Amendment, whatever its flaws, does at least reflect the will of the people of Ireland in 1983, that they wanted the unborn to have human rights and to be protected in our law and in our state.
Well, we saw some of the politicians, Alan Dukes in particular, talking about the tenor and the nature of the debate that happened in 1983. It was absolutely brutal. I've spoken to my parents about it. They were campaigning against the insertion of the amendment. They would tell you it was absolutely brutal. People I've spoken to on the doors say, when we put that amendment in, it was not our intention. We thought we were doing the right thing. They now see that women have died as a result of the 8th Amendment. So, in terms of framing the debate, it needs to be about compassion. It needs to be about saying to a 14-year-old rape victim, you don't have to travel on top of everything else that you have to go through. We are not going to force you to leave this jurisdiction. You can stay home and we will care for you here.
And compassion is something many people would want to have in a situation. Who wouldn't feel compassion? The issue is, on the other hand, this is human life. People on the pro-life campaign say it is not any other kind of life, and the law and the Constitution need to protect that too.
but the law should reflect the lived reality of people. And at the moment, as we sit here, women are importing tablets and they are leaving this jurisdiction. It is nonsensical for us not to recognise that. So when we say we want to talk about compassion, we want to talk about compassion for what's really happening in people's lives. There is no suggestion from the people on the yes side that viable pregnancies will be ended. Absolutely not. But there is a suggestion that we need to put women first. We need to look at the lived reality and the lived experience of these women, and we need to deal with them compassionately.
Right.
And I would like to hear someone on the no side tell me what they want to say to a 14-year-old rape victim. That they say, that's fine, there's your Ryanair ticket,
well,
that's not good enough.
Let's hear from Thomas Byrne on this, because again, the 12-week provision is something that you object to profoundly. What's the alternative for somebody who has been raped and doesn't want that pregnancy to continue?
What we've been told is that the 12-week provision is necessary to deal with all the difficult cases, and I think a lot of people do take issue with that, Aine. That's the issue. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity in terms of a constitutional referendum. You can change the law any day of the week, really, if you want in the Dáil.
So what's the alternative?
Well, the alternative, see, Aine, what's before the people at the moment is yes or no to this particular amendment. That's the issue. That's what people are voting on, and there is no other option at the moment in terms of referendum. What we're being asked to do is support a deletion from the Constitution of the rights of the unborn child without putting anything in its place, without regulating what the Oireachtas can do, and without regulating that the Oireachtas can only deal for the hard cases.
By the way, the party leader says Fianna Fáil will legislate for abortion if this referendum
I don't think any legislator has any option but to legislate for the will of the people, and what the government are putting forward is the 12-week provision. I'm opposed to that. I want to vote against it, but if the Irish people support the referendum, then it's
And do you think that's doable, given that we saw a majority of your parliamentary party supporting no during the week?
Well, look, everybody's entitled to exercise their own conscience on that issue. That's what Micheál has said, and people have taken their own initiative on that. I've done my own thing on this particular...
Does your conscience disappear after the referendum result comes in?
I have to say, from my own point of view, I think if the Irish people speak, it's not up to, in my view, up to anyone's conscience to speak against that. But I think at the moment the campaign is on, people are making their decisions, and, you know, the truth is there's a genuine difference of opinion in the country, and the only way to resolve that is by voting in the referendum.
Minister, just on the rape issue, and this was one of the reasons advanced at the committee and indeed in the Dáil debates, that because the genie of the abortion pill being imported was out of the bottle, because of the difficulties legally with proving rape, yes or no, within the pregnancy time and so on, and all the rest. But this, whatever those arguments at the time, and they carried the committee, they carried Fine Gael, but still, we've been hearing from panellists, and there are many voters watching. They're deeply, deeply uncomfortable about that proposal, and that's why they don't want to vote to give politicians the power to bring in that law.
Mm-hmm. Well, you see, we can't keep saying we trust women and then have that conversation afterwards that we're terrified they're all going to start having abortions just on the flick of a change of a law, that women everywhere, that maternal instinct counts for nothing. I mean, I think that's the strongest instinct anybody will ever encounter, is a maternal instinct. And do we really trust women and doctors? Do I trust Professor Richard Green, whom I trusted to deliver 4 of my children, when he tells me that on a daily and weekly basis he can come across cases in Cork where he has delivered and supported thousands of women through their pregnancies, but the amendment has blocked, for some reason or other, this pregnancy is not viable. It could be a bowel growing outside the human body, the fetus, right, which is causing the growing fetus, as well as the growing baby, whatever. I know language is important in these issues, as well as causing a distress to the baby, causing distress to the mum. In that case, what do we allow? And you know, I heard a real woman talk about that case, and what did she have to do? She was told, go home. She went to Google. She had to use Google, get onto Ryanair. And like a woman said to me in Bantry the other night, and I thought she hit the nail on the head last Friday when I was there doing my clinic, she just said to me, she said, you know, have we really come on any journey or any lint in the journey? When you look back, we exported these problems all those years ago, 34 years ago. It was about Magdalene laundries and institutions and, you know, these schools that were there, industrial schools. And 34 years on, and I'm talking 34 years from the Anne Lovett story, and that 34 years on, we're still exporting these issues to Ryanair and Aer Lingus. And I thought it was a very interesting line that lady from Bantry nailed. And is that what we still want to do as a society? Do we want to support women, or do we want to export the women? And I think we can't keep wringing our hands in disgust and whatever when we read of, and we will read of another Anne who will be 15 years of age, who will bleed to death in her own bathroom or in her own bedroom. We will read of another Anne, and that is as true as any of us are sitting at this table here today. And we cannot turn the blind eye to that. And this is our one and only opportunity to address that reality.
Michael Collins, final word to you.
Talk about exporting our problems. We're exporting all our medical problems here in this country, even the smallest things like I'm doing from West Cork and Danny Healy from Kerry with cataract operations. We continue to do that, and we look at the Vicky Feelings situation here, right up to modern day. We're following people and chasing people and violating their human rights in relation to every issue here.
Is that a two wrongs makes a right argument?
It doesn't. But what I've said all along, and as I said, you know, in 1983, I was 15 years of age. I didn't have a chance to vote, but I would have voted no. It's 2018. I still will be voting no because I want to protect the woman here, and nobody seems to be worrying about the woman who does go abroad for an abortion and comes home here, has a long-term suffering to go through in their life after an abortion. I'd make a woman who was aborted and who survived.
There are undoubtedly, and there are some studies that show that, but overall the metadata, as far as I understand, and again this was looked at fairly comprehensively by the committee, just as a matter of fact, is that there does not appear to be long-term consequences in terms of emotion associated with abortion, nor indeed breast cancer. Obviously, there will be individuals who will be completely broken-hearted and traumatised so that was just the record on that.
Yeah, but listen, when you speak about the committee, I feel that they should have got more time because there was a lot more evidence that should have been given. That may have led, you know, you talk about trusting politicians. Politicians are changing their mind on this issue. You know, in 2011, Simon Harris made a statement to the pro-life group saying that he would be pro-life and protect the pro-life. And Leo Varadkar has made statements, and other politicians have made statements. And now all of a sudden they're changing on the evidence of the committee when the committee didn't meet with the people like Dr. John Monaghan, Dr. John Monaghan and others.
I think to turn the ability of any individual, let alone a politician, but any individual to listen and to learn into a negative is an extraordinary statement by any standards.
It's not an extraordinary statement.
I'm going to the break, Minister. The final word here to you, Louise, briefly.
Well.
Yeah, Aine, as the only woman on the panel and a member of the committee, I can say we considered the evidence, and if people have changed their mind, it is because they have engaged with the evidence.
We are, by the way, going to be obviously dealing with this in the two programmes remaining before polling day, so we'll be hearing much more about the referendum and the issues involved over the next 2 weeks after the break. We're going to be talking about a week of political chaos and uproar over cervical check.